Hey, stop right there. What is your business?
Hey,
what's your business here?
I have an appointment, officer.
ID, now. You don't belong here. Filthy animals like you don't belong here. This is a courthouse, not a zoo.
Check my ID first.
The undercover judge. They saw a black woman standing outside the courthouse and made a decision in 3 seconds. That decision would end their careers. Officer Brian didn't ask questions. He didn't check identification. He didn't follow protocol. He saw what he wanted to see and acted on it without hesitation. What Brian didn't know was that Judge Eva Washington had been watching officers like him for exactly 187 days. Every corrupt ruling, every falsified report, every innocent person dragged through this courthouse like garbage. She had it all, and today, standing on these very steps in her civilian clothes, Brian had just handed her the most important piece of evidence in her entire investigation, himself. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Because the stories we tell on this channel, you won't find them anywhere else. And trust me, you do not want to miss how this one ends. Judge Eva Washington had spent 23 years in courtrooms. She had presided over murder trials, corporate fraud cases, and civil rights violations that made national headlines. She had been threatened by cartel lawyers, bribed by corrupt politicians, and challenged by some of the most powerful attorneys in the country. Nothing shook her, but 6 months ago, something landed on her desk that even she couldn't ignore. A pattern, 17 cases. Same courthouse, same precinct, same result. Black and brown defendants receiving maximum sentences for minor offenses while white defendants with identical charges walked free. Witnesses intimidated into silence. Evidence that mysteriously disappeared. Officers whose testimony changed, depending on who was sitting at the defense table. The State Judicial Oversight Commission had been watching from a distance for 2 years, getting nowhere. The corruption was too embedded, too protected, too comfortable in its own arrogance. So they sent Eva, not in robes, not with a gavel, not with a court order or a press conference. They sent her as herself, a black woman in civilian clothes carrying a briefcase, because they knew exactly what would happen when she walked through those doors. They just didn't know it would happen on the steps. It was a Tuesday morning, 8:47 a.m. Eva had arrived early, reviewed her surveillance notes from the night before, and was walking calmly toward the main entrance when she heard footsteps behind her. Fast, deliberate, aggressive. "Hey, stop right there." Eva turned slowly. Officer Brian Edwards stood 6 feet tall with 17 years on the force and a record of 32 misconduct complaints that had somehow never resulted in a single disciplinary action. Behind him, Officers Rodriguez and Thompson fanned out like they were cornering a suspect in an alley, not greeting a professional on public steps. Eva held her ground. "Good morning, officer." Brian's eyes swept over her once. Civilian clothes, natural hair, expensive briefcase. And in his mind, those details didn't add up to anything legitimate. "What's your business here?" "I have an appointment," Eva said evenly. "With who?" "That's confidential." Brian took a step closer. "Ma'am, this is a government building. Nothing is confidential at the front door." Eva had been briefed on Brian Edwards specifically. 32 complaints, 12 involving black women, 3 involving physical altercations that were ruled justified by the same judge who was also under investigation. She knew exactly who she was dealing with. "I'd like to enter the building, officer, and I'd like to see some ID." Eva reached slowly into her briefcase. Not for her judicial credentials, those stayed hidden. She produced a standard driver's license and held it out calmly. Brian snatched it. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked back at her, then at the license again. "Eva Washington." "That's correct. This says you live in Riverside County." "I do. So what exactly brings you all the way down here on a Tuesday morning? Eva met his eyes without blinking. A meeting. Something flickered across Brian's face. Not suspicion. Something uglier. The particular irritation of a man who is used to people shrinking in front of him, and wasn't getting it. Rodriguez. He called without turning around. Run this. Wait. Before we go any further, drop a comment below. Have you ever been stopped, questioned, or treated like a criminal just for existing in a space? Tell me your story. I read every single one. Rodriguez took the license and stepped away, radio crackling. Eva stood perfectly still. She had a body camera disguised as a blazer button. She had a second recording device in the handle of her briefcase. She had 3 months of prior surveillance already submitted to the commission. And she had the patience of someone who had spent 23 years watching people underestimate her. Brian Edwards was simply the latest. You know what I think? Brian said, his voice dropping to something meant to intimidate. I think you're not supposed to be here. I think those documents in that briefcase aren't yours. And I think the smart move for everybody is if you turn around and go back, wherever you came from. Eva looked at him for a long moment. Is that your professional assessment officer? His jaw tightened. What happened next took 4 seconds. Brian's open palm cracked across Ava's face, so hard her head snapped sideways. The briefcase flew from her grip. Legal documents scattered down the courthouse steps like confetti in a storm. Before she could recover, Brian grabbed her by the throat, slammed her back against the stone wall, and twisted her arms behind her back. Metal handcuffs bit into her wrists. Filthy animals like you. Brian hissed directly into her ear. Belong in cages. Not courthouses. Rodriguez and Thompson gathered around. Nobody intervened. 2 of them pulled out their phones. They were recording. So was Eva. Her jaw throbbed. Her wrists burned. 20 feet above her head, carved in bronze above the courthouse entrance, were the words, "Justice for all." She read them twice. Then she waited. Inside courtroom 7, Brian Edwards was a different man. Calm. Polished. Authoritative. He straightened his uniform, cleared his throat, and stepped into the witness box like he owned it. Temporary Judge Harrison, a 64-year-old man who had presided over this courthouse for 11 years and had, according to Ava's file, ruled in favor of law enforcement testimony 94% of the time, leaned forward with the quiet approval of a man greeting an old friend. Officer Edwards, the prosecutor Sandra Walsh began. Can you describe the events of this morning? Brian nodded gravely. Yes, ma'am. I was conducting routine security protocols at approximately 8:47 a.m. when I observed a suspicious individual attempting to access the courthouse without proper verification. He gestured toward Eva, now sitting at the defendant's table. A purple bruise blooming across her left cheek, wrists marked from the cuffs. She sat completely still, watching. The individual, Brian continued, was dressed inappropriately for court proceedings, carrying what appeared to be stolen legal documents, and became increasingly agitated when asked to comply with standard security procedures. Judge Harrison nodded. And her demeanor? Erratic, Your Honor. She was making claims about having an appointment, but couldn't provide any verification. She became verbally aggressive, used profanity, made threats. Brian's voice was steady, practiced, almost musical in its confidence. In my 15 years of experience, I've seen this pattern before. Individuals who believe that if they claim to be someone important, the rules don't apply to them. In the back row, the court stenographer's fingers flew across her machine. Every word was being recorded. Brian didn't know that 3 rows behind him, a young law clerk named Maya was staring at the defendant with a growing sense of unease. Something about the woman's posture. Something about her eyes. The way she sat at that defendant's table like she was the one running the room. Did she resist arrest? Walsh asked. Absolutely. She became physically combative when I attempted to place her in protective custody. I was forced to use minimum necessary force to ensure the safety of Courthouse, personnel and the public. Brian reached into his pocket and produced his phone. I have partial footage, though unfortunately my body camera malfunctioned this morning. How convenient, Eva said quietly. The room went still. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry? Eva looked up from the defendant's table. Her voice was calm, measured. Nothing, Your Honor. Please continue. Brian pressed on, his eyes briefly finding Ava's before sliding away. What we're witnessing here is a textbook case of someone attempting to use accusations of racism to deflect from their own criminal behavior. She was trespassing on government property. She was carrying suspicious documents. And when confronted, she immediately played the victim. Several people in the gallery nodded. Rodriguez took the stand next, corroborated everything, word for word. The same script, different mouth. Then Thompson. Same script again. 3 men. 32 complaints between them. 0 disciplinary actions. 1 story. Eva had documented all of it. Your Honor, Brian concluded, his voice rising with manufactured righteousness. This is simply another case of someone trying to game the system. I was doing my job. I was protecting this courthouse. And I would do it again. He stepped down from the witness box looking satisfied. He had done this dance many times before. He had never once considered that the music might stop. I need you to subscribe right now if you haven't already. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds of this story is something I promise you have never seen coming. Hit subscribe. Hit the bell. Don't you dare click away. Judge Harrison shuffled his papers and looked toward the defendant's table. Does the defendant wish to speak on her own behalf? Eva Washington stood up slowly. She smoothed her blazer, rolled her shoulders back. And when she looked at Judge Harrison, something in the room shifted, a pressure change, subtle and sudden, like the moment before a storm breaks. Yes, she said. I do. She reached into what remained of her briefcase and produced a single credential. Wallet, slim, navy blue, gold embossed seal on the front. She placed it open on the table facing Judge Harrison. The room was silent. Harrison leaned forward to read it, then leaned forward further. The color drained from his face in a slow, terrible cascade. She reached into what remained of her briefcase and produced a single credential. Wallet, slim, navy blue, gold embossed seal on the front. She placed it open on the table facing Judge Harrison. The room was silent. Harrison leaned forward to read it, then leaned forward further. The color drained from his face in a slow, terrible cascade. State Judicial Oversight Commission. Senior Investigative Judge, the Honorable Eva L. Washington. My name, Eva said clearly, is Judge Eva Washington. I am a senior investigative judge appointed by the State Judicial Oversight Commission. I have been conducting an undercover investigation into this courthouse, this precinct, and the officers currently in this room for the past 187 days. Nobody moved. Brian Edwards stood perfectly still near the gallery wall. The satisfied expression on his face had not yet caught up with what his brain was beginning to process. This morning's incident, Eva continued, was the 14th documented instance of Officer Brian Edwards using excessive force against a black civilian on these courthouse steps. It was also, fortunately for this investigation, the most thoroughly recorded. She reached back into her briefcase and produced a tablet. A video began playing on the courtroom display screen. Full footage. Multiple angles. Brian's open palm. The throat grab. The wall slam. The handcuffs. His voice, crisp and clear through the recording device in her blazer button. Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses. The gallery erupted. Brian's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Officer Rodriguez, Eva said, turning slowly. Your corroborating testimony this morning was the 19th time you have provided false witness statements in this courthouse. Officer Thompson, you're 18th. She paused. I have all of them. Dated. Cross-referenced. With the original case files. Maya, the law clerk, was on her feet in the back row. Her hand pressed over her mouth. Judge Harrison had gone the color of chalk. And Your Honor, Eva said quietly, saving him for last. Your 94% ruling rate in favor of law enforcement testimony in a courthouse with this level of documented misconduct is something the Commission has been reviewing for 8 months. Today's proceedings will be added to that file. She closed the tablet, straightened her blazer one final time. Officer Edwards, you told this courtroom that certain individuals believe the rules don't apply to them. Ava's eyes found Brian's across the room. I'd like you to think very carefully about who that actually describes. She nodded to the back of the courtroom. The doors opened. 6 state investigators entered in full credentials, followed by 2 officers from an outside precinct, the only ones in the building with clean records. Brian Edwards felt the handcuffs before he heard them. Cold metal, biting into his wrists, exactly the way he had put them on Ava Washington 40 minutes ago. 4 counts of excessive force, 2 counts of filing false police reports, and 1 count of civil rights violation under federal statute. He was suspended without pay pending trial. Officers Rodriguez and Thompson faced identical charges, with additional counts of conspiracy and obstruction of justice for their coordinated false testimony. Judge Harrison resigned from the bench 48 hours later, citing personal reasons. The Commission's full report on his tenure was forwarded to the State Attorney General's office the same afternoon. 31 of the 17 original cases Ava had flagged were reopened for review. 14 defendants, men and women who had served time based on falsified testimony and corrupted rulings, began the process of having their convictions overturned. Eva Washington returned to her official courtroom the following Monday. She wore her robes, she carried her gavel, and on her desk, beneath a stack of new case files, was a single photograph, taken from courthouse security footage that Brian Edwards never knew existed. It showed Eva standing at the bottom of those steps, briefcase in hand, bruise forming, handcuffs on, 20 feet below the words, "Justice for all." She kept it there as a reminder, not of what happened to her, but of what she had come to fix. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. We drop new stories every week. And drop a comment below. Do you think Brian Edwards got what he deserved? Or should the consequences have gone further? I want to hear from you. Justice doesn't always arrive on time. But when it does, it arrives in full. Thanks for watching and listening.